to this webinar. Welcome to this webinar, Reviving Europe's Circular Economy, the case for binding resource targets and systemic transformation. It is organized by the Materials Task Force, the Club of Rome, and the Hot or Cool Institute. And we're happy you can join us on something that is so topical and with two very wonderful experts and authorities on this topic, the circular economy. Now, if I may, it's been 10 years since the EU adopted its first circular economy action plan. That was about 2015. And it is a plan that was meant to shape the EU internal market in an attempt to align it with its environmental imperatives. And it is fair to say, over these 10 years, implementation of the circular economy plan has affected not only Europe, but also other parts of the world that are trading with Europe. In fact, it's actually had, especially low-income economies, reshape their policies and practices in order to align with EU environmental and circular economy objectives. If we look at it carefully, over the last 10 years, then, what has the circular economy achieved for Europe and what impact has it had on the world? What lessons can we take from implementation? Just to give a few numbers, taking resource extraction and materials, for example, we know that resource extraction and processing of materials is responsible for over 90% of related biodiversity loss and water stress, about 60% of climate impacts, including land use change, and upwards of 40% of health-related impacts of pollution. To take one of the central indicators of the circular economy, the circular material use rate now is at 12.2%. In 2010, this rate was 10.8%. So in 15 years, we've managed a 1.5 percentage point increase. It is fair to ask the question, is it despite the Circular Economy Action Plan or because of the Circular Economy Action Plan? Another indicator here is the material footprint, which has remained high at about 14 tons per person in the EU. This, if you compare to low-income countries, a typical EU country would be one of the high-income countries that consumes about 6 times more resources than the low-income countries. Still, there's growing social tensions in the EU as well. Citizens are complaining of growing inequality, and that fairly little attention is being paid to the well-being implications of circular economy implementation. We're seeing a cost of living crisis, for example. Housing affordability is becoming an issue across most European capitals, or maybe not even just capitals. Globally, though, we're also seeing a fast-changing landscape, right? The current US administration, one of the EU's closest allies and trading partners, is slinging tariffs left, right, and center, including at the EU. In 2025, for example, the Global Trade Review said restrictions on global trade have affected more than $2.7 trillion of goods. This has tripled the amount from 2024. China is rising and has a firm grip on renewable energy technology resources, which the EU needs to fulfill its net zero strategy by 2050. We have a global multilateral system that is sort of flailing, and this is the arena where Europe has been a trusted arbiter for quite some time. And we know that the EU, for all its discussions about competitiveness, imports more than 2 times more goods by weight from the rest of the world than it exports. And economies from Africa, Asia, Latin America, on which Europe depends for its competitiveness or for its competitive strategy, are getting a lot more assertive because they need their own resource endowments to develop their own economies. Right? It is in this context that we're having this conversation today. And it is also happening at the eve of the Circular Economy Act, which the European Union is getting ready to pass next year. My name is Akenji. I'm the co-chair of the Materials and Consumption Task Force and the executive director of the Hot or Cool Institute. With me today in conversation, Leena Ylä-Mononen, who is executive director of the European Environment Agency, Before Leena became executive director, she was director general at the Ministry of Environment of Finland, if I have it right. And she also served as one of the directors of the European Chemicals Agency, which is based in Helsinki. We also have Janez Potočnik, who is the co-chair of the International Resource Panel and a partner at Systemic. Now, Janez has been a European Union Commissioner twice, once as the Commissioner for Science and Research, and also between 2009 and 2014 or 15 as a Commissioner for the Environment. Going into this conversation today, Europe now looks to passing a Circular Economy Act next year. What lessons have we learned from the last 10 years? Where are there gaps in design of implementation? And where can we find emerging opportunities to strengthen the circular economy approach? For this, I have a few questions based on this, which I would like to put up. Janez, if you don't mind, I would go to you first. As co-chair of the International Resource Panel, but also because the panel put out the Global Resources Outlook last year, looking at global resource use and aspects such as inequality and demand. Would you like to carry us through a picture of some of the key messages coming out of that report?
Hi, Luis. Hi, dear friends. Before starting, just two comments. If you maybe see the circle on my head, it's not because I'm so in love with the circular economy, but because I was lying on the table of osteopath just a few moments ago. And the second comment is, Luis, I was not most happy with your introduction, and I will tell you why. Because actually the beginning of political work on circular economy was not 2015. And the first circular economy plan, it was 2014 with the circular economy communication. Why that's important? It's important because circular economy communication was put on the table by me, and it was then removed by the next commission, by the Juncker's commission in December. And due to the pressure which they have received from the, in particular, business community who was cooperating with us designing the first proposal, they were somehow forced to put it back on the table. But actually that created an excellent moment because it has actually opened a debate what actually circular economy is, which was before when we put it on the table. And don't forget, I was Commissioner for Environment, and Commissioner for Environment has never put anything on the table which would be good for the business. So that opened that debate widely.
So here we have a concept forged out of conflict.
Yes, yes.
While you were on the hot seat.
Yeah. But let me just quickly share my screen because I think this will be the easiest to basically lead you in 4 or 5 minutes through the whole story of the IRP. So basically what we are saying in Global Resource Outlook is that access and use to natural resources is critical. If you look through the history, it was fundamental in everything, in our geostrategical relations, even when the consumption countries, as you know, have tried to politically control the resource-rich countries. So my conclusion was that the whole history of, I call it colonialization of nature, was also central to something which you already opened, fairness and equity. And our conclusion is that the economy championed by industrialized nations is wasteful and unjust, and that we must shift away from this prevailing resource wasteful approach because it's ethically and ecologically unsustainable. So setting the order right. You know, economy was invented to serve humans and human needs. But if we put it upside down, we actually today look at it more as how it would provide the most output and actually not looking to the human need in the first place. When we talk about definition, materials, biomass, fossil fuels, metals, non-metallic minerals, so everything what we extract from the earth are materials. And if we add land and water, we talk about resources or natural resources. So our report is predominantly about relation of humans and materials, everything extracted from the earth. So in last 50 years, it has more than tripled. When we all the categories grown, but the category which grown most was the non-metallic minerals. It's easy to explain. It's due to the growth of cities infrastructure in those parts of the world where majority of the population it's located and it's currently growing the fastest. And then we asked ourselves the question, which are those human needs which are most resource intensive? And built environment, mobility, food, energy are more than 90% of all material use which we extract from the earth. But the interesting thing, part of the story comes when you put it into the context of country income groups. More than half of that it's in low-income countries for food provision. Then in lower middle income countries, more than 60% for food and housing provision. In upper middle income countries for housing and mobility provision, and in saturated economies like we are, it's basically pretty much shared among these four mentioned critical human needs. We look a lot to the material footprint, which is actually showing the consumption of materials in your own economy. And it's very interesting that in Europe and North America, it's basically stagnating in the last 20 years, which is good news because population growth and economic growth was neutralized by technological development. While in Africa and West Asia, it is growing a lot, but mainly due to population growth, while in Asia and Pacific and Southern Europe, it's growing also a lot, but mainly on economic growth. But what I want to say is that when you look to the world figure, which is growing of material footprint for 62%, 1/3 explained by the economic growth, 2/3 by economic growth, 1/3 by population, and minor neutralization by technological progress, this is not telling you a lot because you need to look to different kind of circumstances in which this is occurring. And you see that unfortunately in Europe and North America, the things are happening on too much high level. High-income countries are consuming 6 times more materials per capita than low-income countries and having 10 times more climate impact. The thing currently it's happening mostly in the middle-income countries where the things are really growing fast, and the tragical part of the story is that low-income countries are not moving at all. When we look it through this high, low-income countries, so from this social aspect, we can also conclude that high-income countries still show the highest impact footprint per capita and are outsourcing impacts to low-income countries. And in particular, this is seen in the biodiversity footprint and loss. And one of the conclusions of Earth for All, as you very much know, it's that negative social tipping points will be reached actually before severe environmental tipping points. So the conclusion is simple. Environmental transition can only be successful if it goes hand in hand also with the social transition. Then the last thing which we were addressing was then the impacts. And our point is that extraction and processing of materials can actually explain the triple planetary crisis impact. 60% of the climate impacts, 40% of air pollution impacts, and practically all land-related biodiversity impacts and water stress impacts. And we have, for the first time, done analysis through the provisioning systems logic, where we have found out that, for example, when you look to climate change, all human needs are participating in the same way. When you look to the household fuel use, so to the pollution, you have to look to heating, energy, private mobility. When you look to water stress and biodiversity loss, you have to look to the food system. So our conclusion is that in the future, decoupling resource use from economic activity is a must, and we must decouple economic activity from well-being growth, both from the resource use and altogether from environmental impacts, looking to all natural resources, but focusing on those who are most resource intensive, which is setting me to the last slide. So circular economy, which we will talk today about, is actually exactly about instrument to deliver that decoupling, which IRP is talking about. So that's for the beginning. Thank you.
Janez, always a tour de force with you. You're putting out numbers and giving a really clear context. If I may push you just give me a bit of a teaser. Given the numbers, the level of saturation of material use in Europe, is it feasible that we can move forward without addressing material consumption in Europe?
I think not. I think material consumption is simply not on the political agenda as it is, for example, the energy agenda, and understanding that actually the use of materials and extraction and processing is actually driving the triple planetary crisis, that you can hardly effectively solve for example, the climate crisis only through the energy sector. So yes, of course, energy transition is critical and very important, but you have to understand that energy transition will not automatically make our economic systems less wasteful and more just. So we have to focus on transition of all economic sectors, and that leads you critically to the circular economy.
Thank you so much, Janez. We'll now move from this broad picture going to a bit more specific to Europe. Leena, you put out a report this year, which I described as very polite language with very terrifying data. The Europe's Environment 2025. And I know that you actually not only look at the issue of the Europe's current environment, but you link it to the social aspects. Can you give us a quick picture of where we are, the current status of the environment and society in Europe?
Thanks, and thanks for inviting me. Yeah, indeed, we launched this 5-yearly report, Europe's Environment 2025, this autumn, a couple of months ago. And it is the most comprehensive scientific assessment available today of the current state and outlook of Europe's, our continent's environment and climate topics. And the news is indeed not good. So outlook is not definitely good. We are not on track to meet the majority of our targets. And also more environmental impacts will be felt across our continent. And hence the urgency cannot be overstated. We can start by saying that biodiversity is declining in Europe across lands, freshwater and marine ecosystems, 60% of species and 80% of habitats in poor or bad state. 62% of European soils already show signs of degradation. Water scarcity is increasing. 1/3 of Europeans already suffering water stress. And while overall trends on the greenhouse gas emission and climate change action are comparatively positive, we already face severe and increasing impacts of climate change because indeed the global trend has not gone down. And this will also lead to massive economic losses in the years to come. Pollution is still also an issue. We have made good progress on reducing air pollution over the last 10-15 years, but the future outlook is more mixed, with significant challenges around noise and water and chemical pollution. And coming to today's topic, resource use, the news is not good there either. And we already heard from Janez, the basic figures, how we are basically consuming more materials than most of the other regions in the world. And this is unsustainably high. And just like Janez said, this is also one of the critical key root, cause for the challenges mentioned earlier. So climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution. At the same time, though, circular economy is central to the European Commission's the new political agenda and the vision for a climate neutral, competitive, and secure Europe. And on paper, everybody seems to agree. It's a topic, circular economy is a topic that everybody seems still to have a very positive impression, including business. But in practice, it is harder. If we look at the overall status on where we are on transition to a circular economy, we see it very mixed. So we have made some good progress in Europe when it comes to circular design and waste recycling, but there is still much to be done in terms of scaling circular business models, for example. And other indicators such as waste generation and circular use of materials that you also, Luis, were referring to, so that things are really stagnant and not improving. So indeed, 2024, 12.2% of materials used in the EU came from recycled materials. And indeed, only 1.5% more than it was in 2010. And well below the ambition of the Circular Economy Action Plan that we have had already in Europe for a long time. So despite all these efforts and the policy attention, Europe's economy really remains largely linear. And of course, this is also posing a threat to the now very hot topic, Europe's strategic autonomy. So, of course, I mean, as said, it's a no-brainer. Moving to circular economy can really significantly reduce emissions, reduce waste, and reduce our dependency on imported raw materials. But also, our report stresses that resource use is not only an environmental issue, but also a social one. It calls for policies that combine circular economy measures with social fairness safeguards, address energy poverty and inequality, invest in education and skills, and ensure that the transition to sustainable provisioning benefits all citizens and not just the economy and the business. So a just circular economy can arbitrate and address also employment, informal labor and gender gaps. And all in all, circular economy is a positive policy for the just transition if it is well managed. But as said, we are not there yet. So climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and unsustainable resource use continue to pose very serious risks to our, I would say, very way of life in Europe. Our report on the other hand also shows that there are signs of change and reasons for hope. And we see in other areas how really consistent policy, quite often with ambitious targets, can, and combined with really solid implementation, can drive real change. This has worked in the areas of energy transition, for example, or reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in general, or combating air pollution. Those are two good examples. So now we would need a renewed, ambitious and consistent policy framework for circular economy. And this is, of course, where we hope that also a report with its many examples of the country cases or the individual cases, what is being done, can then also inspire us to do more. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Leena. If I may, just very quickly ask you, quite often, for those of us that sit in Europe, we think the impact of climate change and environmental degradation will happen elsewhere in the world, and we will watch it on TV like it's foreign news. But your report is making very clear that we are beginning to see impact of it in Europe. And in fact, in the case of climate change, Europe is warming the fastest.
Indeed. Europe is the fastest warming continent, and we will see already with this still on paper achievable 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming, we will face really significant impacts. And of course, the higher we go, the more serious the impacts also will be. And this is also leading to really massive economic losses. So worsening climate impacts could lead to, the estimations are that 2.4 trillion euros between 2031 and 2050, if we surpass the famous 1.5 degree Celsius decrease, which is already, almost certain. So it is a huge, both economic, but also, of course, I mean, it increases all these issues. It aggravates the pollution impacts. It definitely has a big impact on biodiversity loss, on the ecosystems, but also on human health directly and on our infrastructure. So everything, basically. So it definitely is very much our problem.
I'll stay with you a little bit more. Now it's 10 years of this, and if we add the 1 year that Janez suggests that the circular economy communication came out, it is more than 10 years, definitely 11. Or if you add a preparatory time, we're looking at close to 13 years of a circular economy. What lessons can we learn from this, from implementation? Just a few that you might want to point out.
Do you want to start, Janez?
Yeah, go on.
Whatever you wish. But maybe just to say the question which you asked, Leena, about the impacts, I think my country, Slovenia, it's actually the best example in that. So we were hit 2 years ago in 2023 with summer storms, which were basically repeating each second day. So the trees, Slovenia is very rich with the forests, were falling like matches. And everything ended at the end with a major flood. And the cost were calculated at the end to 16% of GDP, which is actually 1/3 of budget. So if this would not be spread then on 5 years to cover that, if that would not be helped by covering also through European budget, none of the countries can carry that kind of burden of climate impact. So this was isolated, but it's not anymore isolated. These effects will be getting more frequent, and we all know that. So if somebody doesn't understand that, this is deep economic category, and please do consider it also in that respect. But if we look to last 10 years, if I would start with a debate which was triggered in 2005 and everything what was happening after that with the circular economy package #1, then Green Deal, which actually led us to circular economy package #2. I think these were all good developments. And I think that Europe was doing some very nice steps. And 10 years ago, nobody, globally in particular, was not talking about the circular economy. Today, it's pretty much a very well accepted concept. And the last World Circular Economy Forum, which is co-organized also by Sitra from Finland, was in Brazil. The next one will be in India. So the things are getting global, and it's getting understood that basically circular economy, it's actually just behaving naturally, if I would put it like that, because all nature around us is behaving in circularity, based on circularity principles. Nothing is lost, everything has its purpose. And the critical question in that respect is just, are we humans part of nature? And if we are part of nature, why we are not behaving accordingly? So, but if I use the report which Leena was of course, fundamentally behind EA, that is an interesting message which is coming out from that report. You know, when EA was evaluating different policies in the last 10 to 15 years, and one of the policies which was evaluated was also the circular economy, and 11 policies there were evaluated. And they are all in 5 are in green, 6 are in yellow flagged, so none is critical. So one could conclude from there that the things are going pretty well. But when you look then to the figures, how much has actually circularity rate increased? We have moved from 10.7 to 11.8. Apparently now the new figures are 12.2 from the statistical office, but the conclusion is pretty much the same. So the circularity rate is not increasing and the policies are good. So something it's not, so I think it's a very important message from the EA. So please, Commission, look to your policies, because it's obviously that more needs to be done. And from that perspective, I think that the Circular Economy Act, and I hope we will speak about that also more in this webinar, it's a critical opportunity. Because if we don't do some critical steps there, then we simply miss the point. Circular economy is simply not economically attractive, and we need to change the things.
Janez, let's stay on this a little bit. A lot of, you've talked about decoupling, and a lot of what we've seen being pushed towards in the name of the circular economy is efficiency improvements. And we simply know that this is not working, or at least it's not working as fast as we expect it to. And some might even get cynical in suggesting that the circular economy strategy has become a sort of business protection strategy that has been reduced to recycling. This pushes it a bit too far, but it's not entirely borne out of nothing. Would that be a very unfair characterization?
No, I think it's not unfair characterization. It's for me, it's critical to understand that a lot of really good examples which we can see out there and which we should appreciate in various kind of business sectors, it's actually a good sign. But if you want to make circular economy a norm, you need to change the system. And that's what is the critical thing. And by the way, if we talk about Circular Economy Act, Circular Economy Act should not look to sectors. Circular economy should look how to establish the conditions that the circular economy as a principle would develop well across the whole economy. And I think that is important thing which I hope Commission will understand, because the signals which we are getting currently from the Commission is that they are again looking more how to show how to improve some things, but also to show that developments in the past and examples which we can show were not so bad. So I think the quote here from, I think it's a Brazilian writer, it's very appropriate. Don't chase your butterflies, mend your garden, and the butterflies will come.
I was waiting for when you'll bring out a quote.
Wonderful.
Leena, did you want to speak to this?
Yeah.
The last 10 years.
So what we have learned, first of all, that really agreeing with Janez that, I mean, it is now really widely accepted and known concept, circular economy, and not only indeed, I mean, in Europe, but also globally. And that is really great. But of course, that the circular economy is so much more than just managing waste or recycling. It is really keeping about the value of materials high and making them last longer in the intended use. Also this reuse and repair concepts. And I think that in those areas, those more really, I mean, more fundamental points of circular economy, we haven't seen really great progress yet. So this would require really the circular business models and be supported and break through, and more decisive transition from, for example, ownership models to service-based models and solutions. But I don't think that we see yet that in enough large scale. We will have a new briefing coming early next year where we exactly look at these circular business models, and they are indeed not yet scaling across our continent. So large-scale success of a circular economy would rely also heavily on returning substantial quantities of these secondary, high-quality secondary raw materials to productive use, and also this would require scaling of sorting and recycling, but also huge investments, and seeing how it logistically and business-wise can make sense. Because I mean, of course, Europe is quite large territory, and also some member states have a quite challenges in the logistics. But we face the problem that the virgin materials are basically cheaper, much cheaper than the recycled materials. So all these are like a system level challenges to really move and progress towards true circularity. So of course, this future EU Circular Economy Act can be a strong enabler, I mean, to find ways. But also it should also definitely then look at the system level changes and also looking at not only the efficiency but also the sufficiency elements. But that may be too much to ask in this political climate.
This links very nicely to what I would like to ask. Perhaps Janez, because you also talked quite a bit about provisioning systems. I would like to bring the citizen angle to this and the people angle to this, because we know, for example, from Leena's numbers that there's a 5-ton per capita waste generation per citizen every year. And the European Investment Bank, I'm just looking at data which says to close the current supply gap in housing shortage, it estimates that the EU would need to build almost 1 million new dwellings. And we also know from Eurostat, for example, that 21% of EU population are at risk of poverty and social exclusion. If we make the argument that the economy is supposed to be in service of people and society, and we're seeing these numbers that essentially show people being sidelined. Well, not sidelined, but not sort of being addressed very directly by a circular economy strategy. How do we reflect this?
Yeah, provisioning systems are indeed a new way of looking to the matters. And in the Global Resource Outlook, which I was introducing at the beginning, actually, the whole logic is now based on provisioning systems. So we don't talk about economic sectors, but we rather talk about meeting human needs. As I mentioned before, I think that's very critical because it's putting the order right. Economy is there to deliver, to meet the human needs. That's why it was in the history invented. And I think it's pretty important to understand that somehow the logic works like that, Lewis. We don't need cars, we need mobility. You don't need a chair, but you need to sit. You don't need light bulb, but you need light. You don't need refrigerator, but you need cool and healthy food. You don't need fertilizer, but you need healthy plants. If you can guarantee that on different way, please do it. By the way, you don't need CDs, you need music, and that's what we have already done. So I think that on the top of decarbonization, this dematerialization logic, it's also a pretty important part of where we would need to go. And looking really to the human needs, I think it's terribly important, because that leads you to exactly what Leena was mentioning, to the different business systems and different kind of solutions which we would provide, which would go against the standard systems which are currently existing. But of course, since if something is existing, if something is profitable, there is no big interest from the players who are there that would change. That's why the pressure should come from both, from the policymakers and from the civil society. And when you talk about us as individuals, I think if you want, it's actually not the quote, but it's close to that. The point of perception, it's extremely important, because we normally look to all the problems like they are external to us. But whenever you are in the morning complaining that you are caught in a traffic jam, you are terribly wrong. You are traffic jam. So, that's a kind of logic which we should, as individuals, somehow integrate when we approach to those questions, and do understand that through our behavior, we contribute in one or another direction.
The Hot Cool Institute, my organization, has just put out a report, A Climate for Sufficiency. It's putting the discussion on sufficiency center stage. And it pretty much argues that given the remaining carbon budget and the trend in resource use, we're getting to a really immoral spot where meeting our basic needs is beginning to compete with taking actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the more we wait, the more we postpone the difficult decisions, the more damaging it will be. And we know the social consequences that are coming out of this. But I would like, if you could touch, I will get to Leena later on sort of major gaps and challenges we're facing now in the implementation of a circular economy. But Janez, if you could quickly touch on the sufficiency part, because you've talked about provisioning systems.
By the way, the title of the report which you are mentioning is just telling that your institute is a good institute. And sufficiency, it's an important question to ask, because immediately when anybody starts talking about sufficiency, we think about consumer. But sufficiency has actually two sides of the same coin. One is, of course, that we as consumers can behave differently and can act more responsibly. But we can talk about that because economic signals are not actually sending us to behave more responsibly. That's the problem. But on the other hand, you can provide, because there is immediately then the question, then the people will lose and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But on the other hand, you can provide the same human needs by using less materials and by using less energy. And that's from the production side of the logic. So that's where optimization is absolutely feasible and and it's very much logically connected with the business models and everything which we were discussing before. And I think it's important to look to this sufficiency story from both, from the consumption and from the production side.
Thank you. We're going to move in the next phase. We'll talk about the upcoming Circular Economy Act and how we can reflect these lessons. But before that, Leena, what challenges or major gaps do you see in the current approach before we talk about this upcoming act? If you want to add to that, I know you already started mentioning quite some of this. Yeah. But if you could elaborate a bit on that, it would help us see where the Circular Economy Act could land.
Yeah, firstly, of course, Europe alone, again, cannot really change this unsustainable resource use at the planetary scale. So, and these are global challenges, no doubt. So we need also something at the global level. UNEA 7 is approaching, so hopefully also they are now looking the report that the the International Resource Panel was publishing and really making some really, really important decisions on that. But of course, EU policies, and we are talking also about internal markets, which is a single market, which is really, of course, I mean, as such, is a great basis to have these rules and policies in place, because yes, we are talking about goods and services, which should also be circulating freely. So we could really gain this optimization in our continent. But basically, major gap is that circularity is advancing very slowly across Europe. So we need to really find ways to become more circular faster. We have to scale these circular business models across Europe. And this could be done, well, many ways, I mean, could facilitate that. But especially, I think very often is mentioned the green public procurement. So really, again, something that the public authorities have a say on and can take decisions on. In our report, we see great examples on this what public is done in the public procurement sites in many member states already, and this should be also scaled up. Another means to scale these circular business models is to put really economic instruments in place. So, for example, reduced VAT for repair, or taxes on virgin materials such as fossil fuel-based materials. And of course, then there's this question of the title of this event as well. We do not have concrete targets on consumption and resource use, only for recycling. So if we want to have this whole circular economy approach, of course, we should also look what kind of targets are meaningful and could be used. So these are perhaps the current gaps that I can see. But at the same time, really, many countries, many member states are doing really great programs. They have their own ambitious policy objectives on these issues. And of course, hopefully at the EU level, we can learn from all these country examples and then scale up them at the whole EU single markets scale, which would be great if we could see a true progress there in the coming years.
Thank you for that, Leena. I'm going to pick up on one of those because I know it's also a pet project. It's a major project of Janez, and he's talked about resource governance for a while. The lack of targets. We seem to have an open-ended mandate on efficiency to get more and more efficient without any clear targets guiding us. Now, talking about the upcoming Circular Economy Act, is there any way we can reflect the idea of targets here and make them science-based?
Yeah. Luis, since I see that Walter Stachel is also putting a lot of comments, I would like to recognize that, by the way, he's one of the real fathers of the circular economy, not me. And I'm frequently using also his comment that linear economy is like a river and circular economy is like a lake. So how to make that lake? That's the real question which you're asking. And I think the very good guidance you can find in something which is based on the Global Resource Outlook recommendations, which we have released together with my co-chair Isabella Teixeira. And it is called Call to Action. And many have already signed to that call. What we are asking there are 4 things. And the one which you were mentioning is the first one, setting the resource use path. So I do believe that material targets would be useful because they would put materials solidly on a political agenda. They would actually give a clear message to all the parts of the government that that's where you have to go and that's what you have to consider. It would, in European context, if you want, circular economy, it's critical story of competitiveness and of strategic autonomy, which is normally used as one of the concepts which we have to follow in the future. And definitely, if you look it through the material footprint, then lowering the material footprint for high-income countries is a must if we want to create a room of maneuver for low-income countries to increase their per capita consumption if we want altogether to stay inside planetary boundaries, which we haven't mentioned a lot. But yeah, planetary boundaries do matter. So what we are proposing in that call to action, it's 4 actions. One is setting material targets or setting material use path. Second, better measurement, because we could do the things better in how we holistically measure the circular economy and other resource efficiency targets. Then the third is what Leena already mentioned, market signals, because current market signals, and that's the core of the name of the project, of the problem, current market signals are still supporting, encouraging the virgin resource use instead of the circular economy. And that until this will exist like it is existing, it's difficult to expect really serious changes. And by the way, we as consumers are biased because policymakers are asking us to behave more responsibly, but if we behave more responsibly, sorry, you will have to pay more. So it's like the all economic theory is teaching you in the separate direction. So you should be stupid if you do like in the context of the current messages which you are getting from the market. And I think that's wrong. And the last thing which we are proposing, the fourth, it's basically improve the governance. Because, in the energy sector, we have convention, which has just ended in Belém. We have International Energy Agency, which is taking care for analysis, data, blah, blah, everything. It was quite a lot of problems in 1972 and it was established. We have now IRENA, which is basically coordinating also to a certain level the policies on a global level. What do we have in material area? Do we have something comparable? No.
There is a question that it's difficult to establish science-based targets for materials, Janez. And I know that this is part of the conversation that is going on now, which if you can comment on this to at least on the complexity of something like this.
Indeed, it's not easy. And we are also struggling in International Resource Panel to have to design at least some kind of corridor, I would say, where the things would need to go. What we know and what we use, basically also in the International Panel now, is that the past is showing that the current material footprint in high-income countries is simply not sustainable. We know that. So what would be the right figure or corridor to land? That's another part of the story. But there are already economies like Germany, like Australia, so high-income countries, which have put material footprint also in their circular economy strategies. And I do believe that Commission would do the right job if they would do the same thing. So I will repeat one point. I do not want or expect from the Circular Economy Act to talk about various issues in various sectors, but to set actually the scene, to set the trajectory that in all sectors the things could move in the right direction.
Thank you. That is so clear. Leena, I know that the European Environment Agency hosts the European Advisory Board on Climate Change. This could be, it seems to me, a very good model to answer this question on science-based targets, especially when it comes to materials. We don't have a similar body, for example, a European advisory body on circular economy or material consumption. Having something like that would actually help the Commission quite a lot. It would also help member states to understand which direction to take in reviewing the scientific evidence for material reductions targets, in identifying consumption-based indicators that can be used, or recommending appropriate levels, as Janez has said. This might be something to consider. But I would ask you to reflect also a little bit, Leena, on the upcoming Circular Economy Act a bit more specifically, and whether you see opportunities. I mean, you've produced this massive report. You've looked at the Eurostat's data. You're leading the European Environment Agency. Where do you see key opportunities to tweak the policy approaches, or where the Circular Economy Act can help in getting a more robust circular economy in Europe?
Well, that's a big question. But of course, it would be crucial to prioritize also the reduction of resource use and move towards a less material intensive European economy, just like Janez has been pointing to. So not only to look at the recycling as such, or the sectors indeed in isolation, that I think that road may have been already sort of seen, and we have seen that it doesn't produce the scale up that we need in this area. So really, how to accelerate the system transition. And one option, of course, the introduction of the targets, also in other areas than waste collection and recycling, would perhaps be raising the priority of circular economy actions, both for the national authorities, but also at the European level, and ensure focus on implementing actions that can really make a difference and generate measurable outcomes. Of course, we need indeed, I mean, like also Janez said, we need, if we have ever targets on these, or whatever targets we need to have a monitoring frameworks which are required at the levels necessary, so that we can also have then pan EU statistics and sectoral, not only sectoral data sets. So, but I mean, this the incentives really to see how we could encourage the really novel business models, the circular business models already mentioned. So how to move from materials, goods to services, that mindset change. We see these happening, but they are always relatively small scale, maybe something in the mobility or something in the how we are using the heavy duty mats in buildings. But then the real scale up and sort of the mindset change is not happening. So hopefully the Circular Economy Act can find some incentives really. And of course, as said, the economical incentives are usually, at least based on the examples from the greenhouse gas emission reduction, that has been a very effective way, and also cost-effective way to go towards the policy targets. But yeah, it's not an easy task, and of course we are talking about really all the systems, all the provisioning and systems, and also behavior of consumers or the users of different materials also within the industry. So having all this matching and also then finding the economic case, the competitiveness case for this is not that straightforward.
But a few questions have been coming in, and I'm going to throw some of them out, if you would. One of those that has been voted up is related to the idea of simplification that is floating around now in Brussels. And the question is, shouldn't we focus on removing the linearity lock-in of the current regulation context, instead of developing more regulation that just receives pushback and cannot work on a linear-oriented base?
You want a comment from somebody who was Commissioner for Environment. You know, you can impact to reality only through two ways. One is through market signals, another is through regulation. And if you are Environment Commissioner, you are responsible only for regulation. You don't have in your hands none of the market signals. That's why you have to work very, very intensively with your colleagues. But since the market signals do not change, and you are responsible to deliver the state of environment, which is good for humans, then you adopt regulation. And of course, everybody hates you, but that's your role. So I would be the first in favor of simplification. But by the way, the thing which was done in the omnibus for simplification has, for me, triple problem. The first problem is the problem of the substance. It is not about simplification in the first place. It's about deregulation. And we have carefully crafted through years something which now was with a flash of hand actually removed in a moment. Second, the process. The process in European Commission was always serious impact assessment, serious consultations, and on the basis of that, you provide then the proposal. That was not seriously present. And the third problem is, of course, a political problem. If we want if we want really that kind of proposals would be accepted, and you need for that the most European central party, People's Party, actually then partner with extreme right, that's not a good sign. If this would be replicated in member states, then I would really not like to see that future. So I think it's truly important that we do all possible for simplification. But as you mentioned at the beginning, I was also Commissioner for Science and Research. And in those days, I really tried hard to simplify. But frankly, member states really want control over their money in a way that sometimes they simply don't want to hear about simplification. So my conclusion at the end of the mandate was simplification is simplification. But I sincerely hope that that's not the case. But indeed, simplification is important. We have too complicated rules.
Thank you. I'm guessing Leena doesn't have an immediate follow-up on that, but I have a different question for you, Leena, if you don't mind. It's also coming from one of the participants. Isn't there a risk of circular economy products, services, or business models to become just another layer of consumption? How can we truly lead a transformation of the production and consumption system itself?
Yeah, this comes back perhaps what Janez, you were talking about, the basic human needs and how can we fill them? I mean, how can we ensure that everybody also have the possibility to meet those needs? But of course, I mean, we are living in a high, let's say, income economies, and so by default, we will also have very high expectations on our material needs. Whether they are sustainable in the longer run is really, I think, a good question. But I think anyway, I mean, instead of owning, for example, the mobility and the car is a great example. Instead of owning your own car, or even two, if you need to both have a mobility in, for example, a family of two, having the services, I mean, having the mobility and first of all, public transport. So in that sense, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to go and rent a own car. It can also really look at these different ways of delivering the mobility that is needed. And public transport is a great invention. Public libraries is another example that people don't need to have all the books in their shelves because there is a system called library where they can borrow books. So it is totally different way of looking at what needs do we have and how can we meet them in different ways, not always by indeed having all then access to the huge amount of, for example, private cars.
Thank you. We're coming up to the top of the hour, and I have one last question for the two of you. What are you, just 1 minute if you would, what are you looking forward to, or what are you hoping for in the next Circular Economy Act that would change the way we've done implementation?
Luis, I think I was clear about that already. I would just say on the question which you asked, Leena. Of course, new business models have side effects, but my advice would be do not throw baby with the bathwater. Yeah, and I think what I expect is simply to make circular economy a norm, because that's what we need, and what is needed is simply the deep systemic change which Circular Economy Act should provide. Let me finish with a quote, of course, from Ernst von Weizsäcker, who was the first co-chair of the IRP, and as you know, it's also a very active member of Club of Rome. Make tons and kilowatt hours redundant, not people. And maybe for the end, the Socrates, strong minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and weak minds discuss people. Let's not discuss people, let's discuss ideas.
Wonderful. Leena?
Difficult to add anything to that. I think the advance and really breakthrough of these circular business models would be my big hope that we could see advancing on. It is not easy, but hopefully this is the direction that is looked, instead of only looking at how to indeed advance this recycling in various sectors. That's also important, but it is definitely not the only thing that circular economy is about.
Thank you so much, Janez. Thank you, Leena. I have an army of people helping me out here. Thank you, Francesca Whitlock, and thank you, Heather Roberts. And to all our participants, it's been wonderful having you here. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and at least it fed into your appetite to push the Commission to give us something better than it's currently indicating. Thank you, and have a lovely day or evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.